Well, let's crack straight on, shall we? We start this morning with the Levelling Up Secretary, and it's more than 5.5 years since the Grenfell Tower fire that killed 72 people. And Michael Gove this morning says the government is partially to blame for the disaster because of poor guidance on buildings. I spoke to Michael Gove just a few moments ago. Thank you so much for being on the programme this morning. I think it's quite refreshing to actually start with policy after the last few weeks, but I did want to talk to you about policy. We all remember the absolute tragedy of the Grenfell fire. 6 years on, it feels like you're finally doing something on unsafe cladding. What is the plan?
Well, we're making clear to developers that we've got a new contract that they've got to sign. So the people who are responsible for erecting buildings, which we now know are unsafe, have to pay the costs of making sure that those buildings are safe. We've been trying to deal with this problem, as you quite rightly say, for a number of years. And there have been well-intentioned efforts, actually, by lots of people. But the nub of it is that until recently, the leaseholders, the people actually in the flats, were being asked to consider paying for some of the costs for things that they were not responsible for. So that should end, now that we're publishing this contract, and saying that developers, and to be fair, they accept the responsibility, should pay up.
Sky's city editor, Mark Kleiman, reported this week that you're close to signing this legally binding deal to fix unsafe buildings. So when do you hope it's going to be signed, and how much could it cost the industry?
Well, we're going to publish it tomorrow, and we are going to give every developer a sort of window of 6 weeks during which we hope they will sign. Some have already indicated that they will. I mean, I don't want to preempt, there's been a bit of speculation about some of the developers who will, but all the indications are that the overwhelming majority will, and those who don't will face consequences if they don't sign the contract. We'll make sure that, in effect, they won't be able to build anything more in the future. We think it will be in the realm of billions that we will be able to unlock in order to deal with this crisis.
In the region of 5 billion, is that right?
Yes.
I just want to talk. You say that there have been well-intentioned efforts before.
Yes.
At the same time, Grenfell happened 6 years ago. We all remember, the horrific images of those people trapped inside the building. And only 7% of 368,000 dangerous flats have been fixed.
Yes.
It's not good enough. I mean, the intentions might be good, but that's not going to happen,
I completely agree. I am the first, I hope, to acknowledge that we haven't done right by the bereaved and the residents and the survivors in Grenfell, and that is one very, very important mission. But it's also the case that there have been people who have been effectively imprisoned in their own flats for too long. As we know, after Grenfell, there were hundreds of buildings that were identified as having similar faults to Grenfell, not identical, but similar. We knew that all of the people who were in those buildings, not only were they not safe, but it was also the case, entirely understandably, that they couldn't move because they couldn't sell their flat, they couldn't get a mortgage. From an economic point of view, the market was frozen, but from a human point of view, far more importantly, people's lives were completely disrupted. So, again, I have and always will apologise to people for the fact that it's taken this long to sort. But now we have got progress.
Do you also take some responsibility on behalf of the government for what happened at Grenfell?
I think that if you look at what happened at Grenfell, there were lots of factors. But yes, government collectively has to take some responsibility. Now, I think that the responsibility extends before the Conservatives came into government in 2010. And I'm not about attributing blame to individuals. I think that's wrong, because there are a lot of us who have a responsibility to say that the system of regulation that was in place was ambiguous, and it was exploited by people who were putting profit before lives. And again, there is, I think, and I hope this doesn't seem as though I'm dodging responsibility, I don't want to at all. I think there's a difference between presiding over a system that's negligent and actively exploiting it. But it is undeniably the case that the system of building regulation was not right.
Would you apologise to those families?
I absolutely would. And again, I've had the chance to talk to many of the families most directly affected since doing this job. I brought up my children just quite close to Grenfell, and I remember visiting the site just a couple of days after the fire and thinking that it was horrific that this had happened. The more that I discovered about the circumstances there, the more horrified I was. There were people in that building who had warned beforehand that they were in potential danger. Their warnings were not heeded. And the inquiry which followed, and Theresa May was absolutely right to set it up because it's shone a light on terrible practice. It exposed the fact that there were a variety of different people, from the people who manufactured the cladding to the people who applied it, who just didn't do the right thing.
I have one more question on housing before we move on to other issues. As someone who, shall we say, has experience of the peculiarities of the leasehold system, I was quite struck by your interview with the Sunday Times where you said you wanted to abolish it.
Yes.
Are you hoping for that to happen before the election?
Yes. We want to introduce legislation in the final parliamentary session, so later this calendar year, in order to change the leasehold system. It's not easy in legal terms because, when you've got a tangle of property laws going back hundreds of years, unstitching all of that is difficult. But the fundamental thing is that leasehold is just it's an unfair form of property ownership. In crude terms, if you buy a flat, that should be yours. You shouldn't be on the hook for charges which managing agents and other people can land you with, which are, gouging.
Another story that I'm keen to find out more about this morning is, given the state of the ambulance waiting times, is that tomorrow you're announcing a plan to treat 500,000 patients in what you're calling hospitals at home.
Yes.
What's that idea?
Well, the principle there is to make sure that we can provide people with the quality of care that they might enjoy in hospital in their home. And there are at least three benefits from that. The first is that there are many people, I know personally, who would rather have a relative at home if they're ill, and if they can get the care required, and this comes to the second point, if you can make sure that there are visits by nurses or by other clinical professionals who can make sure that someone is comfortable and looked after effectively, then the third thing is that you can also free up capacity in hospitals themselves for the more acute cases that require more specific intervention.
Let's, get to the nub of what this is, right? Hospitals at home, it's not really a hospital, it's your home, right? It feels like quite a nice kind of way of putting it, but you're effectively being treated at home because our hospitals are full.
Yes.
The average ambulance wait time for a heart attack, 93 minutes in December. 55,000 people waiting on trolleys for more than 12 hours in A&E. You're being forced to do this, and you have some nice phrase for it, hospitals at home, because there aren't enough beds.
Well, again, one of the reasons why we need to do it is that there are people who are in hospital who need care, but who can be cared for effectively at home. Again, in hospitals, we all know, there are intensive care units. There are other facilities that do require the individual to have the range of interventions that can only be delivered in hospital. But there are other things that can be done. There are drugs that can be administered. There are treatments that can be monitored. And provided someone is safe and warm at home, then that care can be administered there. And again, when the Prime Minister organised a health summit a few weeks ago, one of the striking things that came out of that, and which many of us knew beforehand, was that if you can have the right bespoke package of care, then someone can be more comfortable and easily as well cared for as in hospital. But it depends on the type of patient, it depends on the type of condition.
Of course. Let's talk about the other Sunday on the front page of the Sunday Times, shall we? This is a story about Boris Johnson and his relationship with Richard Sharp, who is now, of course, the BBC chairman, and whether or not Richard Sharp helped to guarantee or find someone to guarantee an £800,000 loan. Well, according to the Sunday Times, Boris Johnson was formally told to stop asking Mr Sharp for advice about his affairs days before he was announced as the government's choice for BBC chairman. This is the letter, the advice from the Cabinet Office. According to the Sunday Times, given the imminent announcement of Richard Sharp as the new BBC chair, it's important that you no longer ask his advice about your personal financial matters. And I just want to compare that to what Boris Johnson told Sky News last week when he said, Richard Sharp knows absolutely nothing about my personal finances. I can tell you that for ding-dang sure. I mean, how can that possibly be true?
Well, I think, again, I don't know about the conversations that we're carrying on. The only two things I would say. The one thing is that I know that, and I've seen it happen in the past, that there's a letter here, a note there, a comment there. It points towards one conclusion. Once you know all the evidence, actually, another conclusion can fairly be drawn.
At the same time, though, if he was given a letter by Simon Case, by the Cabinet Secretary, saying stop asking him for advice about your personal finances, He can't say, oh, he knew nothing about my personal finances for Ding Dang Shaw. I mean, these two things seem completely contradictory.
Well, again, I would say that I don't know all the details, and...
You must recognise that as well.
I completely recognise how you can produce two pieces of evidence and a conclusion can be drawn. But I know...
It's hard to draw another conclusion.
Well, I know from experience in the past, including when I've jumped to conclusions about people and then found that actually I've been unfair on them, that we just need to see all the facts. And it is the case that the manner of Richard Sharp's appointment is being looked at by the Commissioner for Public Appointments just to make sure that everything was completely kosher. And so, again, it's absolutely understandable to think, aha, this plus this equals that. But my bitter experience is wait until you see all the facts before coming to a definitive conclusion.
OK, we will wait to see the facts. Is Boris Johnson becoming a liability?
No. I think Boris Johnson was a very good Prime Minister, and I think that he has a lot to contribute to public life in the future. OK. Nadeem
Zahawi, another investigation going on, of course, into whether Nadeem Zahawi broke the ministerial code over his tax affairs. Can you tell us when we should expect that report? Is it next week?
I don't know. I know that Sir Laurie Magnus, who's the independent advisor on these issues, who's having a look at it, wants to conclude his investigation as quickly as possible. And I think, in fact, I know that Nadeem wants the investigation to be concluded as quickly as possible. So
have you spoken to him about it?
I know that Nadeem wants the thing done with. I haven't spoken to Laurie Magnus. I wouldn't. But I don't know. And again, I think it's in everyone's interests that the matter is concluded as quickly as possible. But it's also the case that when you've got someone specifically appointed to be independent, then me providing a running commentary on the timing and so on could be misconstrued.
Understood. If he's found to have broken the ministerial code, should he lose his job?
Well, again, it's a serious thing to break the ministerial code, but again, it's up to the Prime Minister in possession of the full facts. I know it's irritating when politicians say, oh, we've got to wait for the result of the inquiry. But once you've set it up, once you've got this independent person looking at all the evidence, I think trying to anticipate what he concludes and therefore what follows. Well, I completely understand that. It's
Mel Stride said it would be difficult. Mel Stride says it would be a difficult finding. You say it would be a serious thing. I mean, it would be difficult, wouldn't it?
Again, I suspect that we'll find out soon enough, and then a judgment can be made on that basis.
Understood. Now, unsurprisingly, all of this, we've been talking about the NHS, we've been talking about the financial allegations that are being investigated is having an impact on people's view of the Conservative Party. We had a surprise guest in calling into our NHS phone-in this week. I just want to play you what happened. This is Rod Stewart calling in to Sky News.
I personally have been a Tory for a long time, but I think this government should stand down now and give the Labour Party a go at it, because this is heartbreaking for the nurses. It really is heartbreaking. In all my years of living in this country, I've never seen it so bad.
I feel like he's articulating what a lot of your former voters are thinking.
Well, I grew up listening to Rod Stewart. I'm a huge fan of his. And all I would say is that the government is absolutely focused on solving the problems that Rod and others are worried about. We're absolutely focused on making sure that we can cut waiting lists. We're absolutely determined to ensure that we can halve inflation, that we can reduce debt, that we can grow the economy, and also that we can deal with the illegal immigration problems, stopping the boats in the Channel. Those priorities are absolutely essential to the government. And, of course, there are people like Sir Rod and others who are natural Conservatives who have concerns at the moment. Our job is to convince them that on inflation, on growth, on reducing debt, on making sure that we cut waiting lists and stop the boats, that we are delivering.
You see, I don't think anyone would dispute that Rishi Sunak's had a difficult hand to play, right? He came off the back of Liz Truss's disastrous budget. We've had a backdrop of high inflation, the Conservatives in power for over a decade. But the polls are moving in the wrong direction. I think we can have a quick look. This is a kind of YouGov tracker poll, and you can see that there hasn't actually been a bounce. The polls are moving in the wrong direction. The gap is still wide. And if you look at the leader approval ratings as well, when you compare Rishi Sunak to Keir Starmer, you can see there, right at the end, Keir Starmer's red line is going up and Rishi Sunak's is dropping. If you're a Conservative MP, you're going to be looking at this and you're going to be really worried.
Well, again, polls are snapshots.
Well, this isn't a snapshot. This is over time.
No, polls... But
that's why I chose it, rather than a snapshot.
evidence would suggest that over the course of the last few years, it's very difficult to say how politics is going to look in a year or in 18 months' time. So again, the evidence there shows the volatility, actually, of public opinion in a variety of areas and the way in which reputations can rise and fall. But
it's not that volatile. There's been a very significant lead for the Labour Party for some time now.
And as there has been for opposition parties during periods when governments have been in power, during the middle of their term in office. The critical thing, though, is people want to see a government that is making an impact. All of us can be commentators and can be invited to offer a gloss on the polls. But the difference is that my job... my gloss on the polls is no better than anyone else's. My job is to deliver.
That's it, though, isn't it? You said that people want governments who are making an impact.
Yes.
You are a reformer, right? You go into departments, you're not worried about breaking a few eggs. You look at Rishi Sunak, you look at Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. Are they a bit timid?
No, God, no. No. I mean,
managerial.
No, well, the thing is that being an effective manager of public money and public services is not a sin, in my view. But it is the case that, first of all, we had to bring stability, and we have, and now we've set out areas where we are reforming. So Jeremy gave a fantastic speech on Friday in which he explained how it is that we can make the country essentially the technological powerhouse of the next century, how by improving education, having a culture of entrepreneurship, making sure that we get more people back into employment and making sure that we have investment everywhere across the country to level up, we can drive economic reform.
Let's talk about education, shall we? Teachers are striking next week. Are they right to?
Sorry?
Are they right to?
No. My own son's school is going to be affected by this. I do sympathise with the position that many teachers are in, but I would ask them respectfully not to go on strike because I believe, as the Education Secretary, as Gillian Keegan has said, you don't need to go on strike to get her attention. She cares about improving our schools.
Because that's the whole point, isn't it? Teachers feel like it is the only way to get people's attention. If you look at the IFS, they say that most teachers will see a 5% real terms pay cut this year, and that's on the back of successive real terms pay cuts over the last decade. We've got a recruitment crisis in teaching. It is no surprise.
It's no comfort to anyone to point out how difficult economic circumstances are overall, and that is why it is so important, and it's our top priority to reduce inflation. That is the best tax cut, the best pay rise that anyone could have.
Well, the best pay rise that people could get is an actual pay rise.
That would only contribute to further inflation in the future. It would only create a spiral.
I thought it was a global inflation crisis. Now you're saying teachers are to blame for it.
No, I'm not saying that teachers are to blame for an inflation crisis. Not at all. But I am saying that all of us have a responsibility to recognise that when public money is tight, when we need to reduce inflation, when we need to get debt down, we also need to make sure that pay awards reflect that. On the recruitment issue in teaching as well, of course pay is a factor, but it's also the case that we need to support teachers by providing them with the right tools to have effective discipline and behaviour in the classroom. The other thing is that the overwhelming majority of teachers go into teaching because they're idealistic. They want to transform the opportunities of the next generation of children. So, again, making sure that we do the right thing in education overall by providing teachers with the tools to deliver the curriculum effectively is also important.
What would be a realistic pay rise, a fair pay rise for teachers?
Again, it's not for me to say, but I think the important thing is that the programme of conversations that teachers and teaching unions are having with the Education Secretary, which I know the Education Secretary is committed to, and she's a warm and open person, that is the best route to a conclusion.
Just finally, when you were Education Secretary, I remember there was a lot of talk about what was termed as the blob, people who were resistant to your reforms. Are these strikes an example of the blob in action?
No.
OK, thank you very much, Michael Gove. Good to have you on the programme.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you.